Alrighty, welcome back. So, in this video, we're going to get started on creating the HTML for our quote container, as well as all the elements inside of it. Alright, let's get started. So, we're going to use our Emmet abbreviations to speed up this process. We can type out a div and then use a period to denote the class, in this case, quote container for our quote container. And then we can also do a hashtag for adding an ID. In this case, it's also going to be quote container, and we can press enter, and Emmet will do the rest. Very cool. All right, so moving on, we're going to want to keep things pretty tidy, like I have with this script comment on line 15. We're going to do the same thing for each of the elements that we're making inside of our container. So to comment something out, the keyboard shortcut on a Mac would be Command ? And on Windows it would be Control ? So I'm going to hit that. And we're going to start with our quote element here. The other cool thing about Emmet is that you actually don't even need to type out div. We can just start with period and then our class name. In this case, it's going to be quote-text. And you can see that we have a div with the class quote text. We're going to use this to adjust the size of our font for our quotes. And inside of here, the first thing we're going to add is our font awesome icon. So this is the quotation mark icon we have to the left of our quotes. In order to do this, I'm going to use Emmet again. And this time it is an I element. And it's going to have the class of FAS, which stands for Font Awesome Solid. There are different types of Font Awesome icons. We'll see another one in a second. And then I'm also going to give it a class of FA-quote-left. If you want to learn more about how Font Awesome works and finding new icons, then definitely check out their website. Okay, and the next part is the most important part. It's our actual quote itself. And we're going to use a span for this, and we're going to give this an ID of quote. We're going to use a span because this isn't going to take up any space on the page other than the text itself. And we're using an ID of quote so that we can target this element in the JavaScript and dynamically change the inner text. For now, we're going to have to just use static elements for our UI building because obviously we haven't done the functionality yet. So I'm going to just type out the quote that we had when I was first showing the project. Okay, so you can see that this kind of messed with the spacing of our project when I typed out all this text, and that wasn't even a lot of text, imagine a paragraph. So in order to fix this, we can turn on word wrap by using Alt-Z. So you can see that now it's broken up this one line into two lines to be able to show all of the content on it. This is going to be very important for you going forward when you're adding any text to any website, so something to keep in mind. Next, we're going to add in our author element. We're going to start out with a div with the class quote-author. And inside of that, we're going to have another span, this time with an ID of author. Same thing, we're going to replace this with our JavaScript, but for now, we're just going to type it in ourselves. Lastly, for this box, we're going to want our two buttons at the bottom. So we're going to comment out a title for our buttons. And we're going to have a container for our buttons. This will allow us to have a flexbox inside of this element that will be different from the flexbox that's within the body. In this case, we're going to spread our two buttons as far apart as they can go. Next, we're going to create our button, our Twitter button. So we're going to start by giving it a class of Twitter-button and an ID of Twitter. We're also going to give this a title. You can see that it populated this here. You can just press enter. And the reason we're going to give a title is so that when you hover over it, in case you're unfamiliar with what it's actually representing as the icon, you can have a little bit of an explanation that will pop up when the user hovers over it on a computer. Inside of this button, instead of having text, we're actually going to have another Font Awesome icon. So we're going to use an I element, this time with the class of FAB, or Font Awesome Brands. So that's the class you would use for any kind of social media or tech company. And we're going to use FA-Twitter for this icon. Okay, and we have one more button. We're going to give this an ID of new-quote, and we're going to type out new quote inside. And this will, of course, be the button for getting a new quote. Okay, so that's it for our HTML for now. So let's save this and head over and check it out. Okay, so it looks pretty good so far. Even though we've had pretty much no styling. The main thing that we have working here is that our body is using Flexbox, and we're centered on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis, which is making everything look great. All right, so now we're going to be looking at the styling for our container itself. We're going to add a background color. We're going to make it a maximum width so that even when the quote text is longer, it wraps to the next line instead of just expanding wider and wider. We're going to make our quote text itself bigger than the author text. We're also going to try to differentiate the author text in another way. And we're going to increase the size of our quote icon here. All right, so let's jump back to the code and get started on that. So we're going to switch back over to the CSS now. And we're going to scroll down and we're going to start with our quote container. So we're going to write out our class here, .quote container. And then we're going to give it a width of auto. And also we're going to cap the maximum width at 900 pixels. So as I said, we don't want the box to just be as wide as possible. We want it to be centered in the screen, and we want the lines of the quote to actually wrap to multiple lines. We're also going to add some padding to the box so that it automatically spaces out all the quotes and buttons and everything. We're going to give it a top and bottom of 20 pixels and a left and right of 30 pixels. Next, we're going to add a border radius. This is going to give our box a rounded corners look, which is very, very modern. You will see that on many, many, many designs. We're going to add a background color, and this time we're going to use an RGBA. You might be familiar with RGB. RGBA is pretty much the same thing, but the A value, the alpha value, allows us to control the opacity of the object. So the reason we're adding this is so we're making a white box, but we want to be able to see through a little bit to the background of the page. And lastly, for our quote container, we're going to add some box shadow. This is another very modern element. If you want to learn more about box shadow, you can very easily look it up, but I'm going to just set in the values here of 0, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels. This is the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, so the up and down. This is the blur, and this is the radius. And then the last thing we'll add is another RGBA. This time we're going to use black, and we're going to have 0.2 for our opacity. All right, so let's save that and go check it out. All right, so that's looking a lot better. We can see we have our rounded corners, we have our shadow, and we can see the text better, but we can also see a little bit of the background. Okay, that's a good start. Let's now start changing up our text. Alrighty, let's jump back to our code, and below this, we're going to target our quote-text, and we're going to make it bigger by giving it a font size of 2.75 rem. You might be wondering why I'm using rem instead of pixel for font size. The short answer is that it helps with responsive design. The longer answer is that rem stands for relative size compared to the root element, specifically the HTML element. In most browsers, that will have a default value of 16 pixels. So why does that matter? Because that 16 pixel value can become bigger on a mobile device when a user scales their text bigger. Basically, it helps us maintain a consistent and responsive design. So 1 rem equals 16 pixels, and in this case, 2.75 rem would equal 44 pixels. Okay, so we can save that and check out how that looks. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Awesome. So we want to make our quotation mark a little bit bigger, and we also want to add another class in case our quote is longer than this and we want the font size to be a little bit smaller. So below this, we're going to add a long quote class. And for a long quote, we're going to give this a font size of 2 rem, which is 32 pixels. And we will dynamically turn this on and off in our JavaScript when it's needed. And lastly, we will change the size of our Font Awesome icon. So we're just going to target this specific Font Awesome class here, fa-quote-left. And we're going to give this a font size of 4 rem or 64 pixels. Alrighty, so let's save that and check it out. Okay, so that quote icon looks like it's a good size compared to our quote text. Next, we're going to work on our author text. We're going to want to make it bigger. We could probably stand to space it a little bit away from the text, so we'll add a margin top. And let's also make it italic. And to change it up even a little bit more, we're going to change the font weight as well. So let's go back and do all of that. So we're going to target our quote author class. We're going to give it a margin top of 15 pixels. We're going to give it a font size of 2 rem. So our quote text is 2.75 rem. We're going to give it a font weight of 400, which is normal. Everything else has a font weight of 700, which is bold. And lastly, we're going to add a font style italic to make it italic. Alrighty, so let's save that and check it out. Great, I think the author text looks a lot better. It's spread out and it has a little bit of a different style to it, so it looks like a separate idea. Perfect. Now, let's have a look at our responsive design on a mobile device. So you can see that for the most part, everything is looking pretty good, other than the buttons, which we haven't done yet. But I actually want to always have a margin on the left and right so that we can have a clearly defined box. So let's go back to our code and fix that by adding a media query at the bottom. So you always want to add media queries at the bottom because you want it to be able to override anything else throughout the code. So we're going to write @media to start our media query, and screen to show that we only want it on screens, and we want it to only be on devices that have less than 1,000 pixels of width. So in this case, anything that is a standard tablet or smaller. So we want to change our quote container to have a margin auto on top and bottom because we're not that concerned with that margin, but we want to make sure that we always have a margin of 10 pixels on the left and the right. And while we're here, let's also make the quote text a little bit smaller on a mobile device. So instead of 2.75 rem, we're going to do 2.5 rem. Okay, so let's save that and go back and check it out. Okay, perfect. So the text is a little bit smaller, and we can also see that we have our margins on the left and right. Okay, that's pretty much all we need to do for mobile responsive design. So that keeps it pretty easy. So in the next video, we're going to fix our buttons. I'll see you in that one. Bye for now.